Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Dixon from the Lexington Veterans Association, and I welcome you to a presentation on the surrender of the Pueblo. We also welcome our fellow veterans viewing this program from the Edith Norse Rogers Memorial Veterans Hospital in Bedford, Massachusetts. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Gresh Lattimore. Gresh Lattimore graduated from Naval Officer Candidate School at Newport, Rhode Island, following a year as a graduate student at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. After commissioning in 1966, he served 2 tours of duty aboard the USS Coral Sea CVA-43 off the coast of Vietnam, followed by a tour of duty as a faculty member at the Naval Academy at Annapolis. After active service, Gresh returned to the Fletcher School to earn a PhD. He joined the Naval Reserve as an intelligence officer, retiring in 1990 after 23 years of service with the rank of captain. Now retired from a career in banking, Gresh serves as chair of the Tufts Advocates for ROTC, an alumni support group for the university's ROTC students. He is a member of the Lexington Town Celebrations Committee and the Lexington Veterans Association Executive Committee. Please welcome Gresh Lattimore.
Thank you, Linda, for a generous introduction. Get all our technology in.
All right, should be all set.
Yeah, okay. Ready to go. Good. All right. I'm a Navy man, and this is a topic that is not showing the Navy in its glory days. But it shows just how important coordination and follow-up are when you're doing something like spying. I want to acknowledge right off the bat that this lecture, not the same one, but the same topic, was first delivered here in the year 2006. And, you know, the story is the story. It was presented by one of our members who was a lawyer, and we didn't have the glitz of color photos and color transmission in those days. But it's just interesting that this is a topic that has come back. You can see just how important things are over time. So first of all, I just want to remind you that I'm connected somewhat with this whole episode because my aircraft carrier, the Coral Sea, was one of the carriers that was gathered after the capture up off the coast of North Korea, and we were ready to do something, and then the president decided we're going to go diplomacy. So, but it's interesting because although we didn't have a full-scale war with North Korea, all of us were affected in one way or another. But to begin, let me just go back quickly to the history of Korea. It has a long, dignified history, not unlike the Chinese in that part of the world, and the Japanese. But by 1905, Japan was able to declare it like a trusteeship situation and essentially turned it into a colony. And the Japanese are not good occupiers. They tried to erase the Korean language and Japanese eyes, the population. So Korea was held in subjugation really until 1945. And by that time, the Russians, the day before the Japanese surrender, had invaded North Korea. And so they had a foothold in the peninsula, and we were the guarantors of the new South Korean Republic. So, as you know, over time, the North Koreans became a communist, militarized society. Whereas in South Korea, although there was a lot of strong arm politics going on, it eventually morphed into the very technological society that we see it today. So these two clashing societies, one to the north and one to the south, were not coexisting. The 38th parallel, you'll probably remember that, was the dividing line between North and South. And in 1950, the North Koreans invaded the South Koreans, and the whole Korean War came about. And we should remember that that war was a United Nations effort. America is very good in gathering about itself allies and not going into a situation all alone. So, but 3 years of terrible warfare in which over 3 million South Koreans perished, there was a truce that was signed. And that kind of remains where the status is right now. So you have, and Kim Il-sung was the first North Korean leader, and of course now we have Kim Il-un, who is the current fellow in charge. And all during this time, the North and the South have simply not been able to get together. So, with that in mind, let's start. Whoops, this is... Lloyd Booker. These pictures show him in his youth, and Lloyd Booker came from Idaho. He had a terribly dysfunctional family, and somehow he, because he was a Roman Catholic, had been in several Roman Catholic orphanages, and that enabled him finally to end up at one orphanage which said to him essentially, "You should go to Boys Town in Nebraska." And he did. So he went there essentially as a high school senior, and that really saved him. Here you see him, number 39 on the football team. He was a starter and a real athlete, but he gave up his senior year in 1945 to enlist, along with many classmates, into the Navy. And so there he is as a 1945 boot camp graduate, and on his first ship, which was the Zulema. But his career was really slated for being a diesel submarine officer. That used to be our main submarine battle fleet before the nuclear engines were made available. So he did what he loved the Navy. He had sort of bootstrapped himself to become an officer because he, after he left the Army, left active duty in the Navy, he went to University of Nebraska on the ROTC program. That is such a golden program that has given so many young men and now women the opportunity to become Navy officers when they would have never been able to do so otherwise. So this is one of the Ronquil was still around at the time of Vietnam, and he was the executive officer on the Ronquil. But since he did not have advanced mathematics training, he would not have been qualified to captain, to lead a nuclear submarine. So the opportunity came for him to become an officer of a surface ship. These are just typical milestones. He gets his commission. He gets married in 1950 to his beloved Rose. Because of all the service that he had been able to succeed at, he was welcomed at an awards ceremony at Boys Town in 1958. Here are he and Rose. Oops. Just before he reported aboard his new ship, the Pueblo. And that's a typical Navy photograph when you make new rank. So what do we have here in Lloyd Bucher? We have a guy who came from nothing, a guy who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, served honorably and successfully as a submarine officer in diesel submarines, and had the opportunity to have command at sea. In the Navy, that's the big deal. You must have command at sea if you're going to go up into the real higher ranks. So he was selected, and he tells the story that if he had been a little better thought of, because there was a list of about 23 that were up for command, and initially he got bumped off that list because one of the admirals in the submarine fleet wanted one of his candidates to be there. But Bucher was able to make the cut, and because of that, would command the Pueblo. Now, I wish this were in color. This is the Blue House in South Korea, which is the residence of the South Korean president. And I just want to now shift into what's happening in the world, because it will affect the Pueblo almost immediately. 2 days before Pueblo put to sea and was going to be in North Korean waters, a hit squad from North Korea of about 23 commandos, if you will, crossed the border and were all set to assassinate the South Korean president. Now, the South Koreans were able to stop them literally at the gates of this Blue House. And this put South Korea, as you might imagine, into an uproar. Now, the same time that this was unfolding, the North Koreans were through their spokesman on the international level, to whom no one was paying any attention to, really, were saying that we will not tolerate any sort of interference with our sovereignty, whether it be at sea or in land. So you have a very, very heightened, excited South Vietnam due to this assassination attempt. You also have the better part of the American fleet off the coast of Vietnam. We had at that time about 300,000 troops in country, plus a whole flotilla of carriers and auxiliary ships off the coast of Vietnam. And now we throw into that a spy ship. And there is the Auxiliary General Environment Research Ship, USS Pueblo. Now there was one ship before Pueblo called the Banner, and the Banner had listened to the Russians as well as the Chinese and had been challenged on the high seas. But nothing of what we'll see unfold on the Pueblo had happened. So as it took a year to get the Pueblo in working order, and even so, its engines, its steering especially, was always a problem. So it was a sort of a half-assed throw together of a spy ship. And along the way, during that year when it was being refitted, Bucher had asked for simple things like, okay, I'm a spy ship, I've got all this high-tech electronics equipment, what happens if the worst happens? Do I have some explosives on board so I could sink the ship almost immediately? He tried to get explosives and never could. He also wanted shredders, and again, trying to think of what might happen in the worst case scenario, and they were never given to him. Evidently, too, the word really was not out in the Navy that this was one of our own spy ships. So he was inundated by classical material, much of which he didn't need, and was just, he should have left it on shore before he sailed. He asked that this be done for him, and they would not allow him to do it. He wanted some armament. And if you see at the bow of the ship there, right at the edge, on top of the two, you can see he had two 50 caliber machine guns. And these, one of the admirals said, I'm not even sure they should be on board. And if they are, you should really put them below decks. But he decided that putting them below decks was not a good idea and might affect the stability of the ship itself. So he had one fore and one aft. But you see, they were there right in the open. They would have been covered in tarpaulin because, again, the Pueblo is up in these waters in January 1968. So they would be covered with tarpaulin and covered with ice. So, okay, man your gun station. You have to run out, chip the ice away, take the tarpaulin off, and then you have to bring out the ammunition. Okay, in the clear, there's no protection for you. So even had he the opportunity at the time to unmask his guns, it would have taken some time. And then finally, he had been assured by the admiral in charge that there was a contingency plan that would enable him to be supported should something really bad happen. But it's not going to happen. And so that's how he went, that's how Booker went to sea. I've got a lot of discrepancies here. I am incapable, literally, of fighting off anyone who boards me. And nonetheless, I know that somebody's going to be able to come and support me. So I apologize for all the wording, but if you look at January 23rd, that is the day Pueblo will be captured. And you'll see there, right off the bat, that one of our reconnaissance aircraft intercepted a message from the North Koreans that they were going to capture the Pueblo. But the message, most people in the Navy didn't even know that the Pueblo existed. And therefore, this message, which would have been a great heads up, never was transmitted to Pueblo. Now, my question, I'm not sure, the crew was about 83 people. And of those, half of them were technicians who were manning all the sophisticated listening equipment. You would have thought they might have intercepted that transmission too, but alas, it wasn't to be. So this is an idea of what the Pueblo looked like. You could see up there amidships the electronic intel spaces. That's where all the spy gear was kept. But it was a very tiny, only 179 feet long. So this was like a little rowboat in the sea, if you will, bobbing up and down. It had none of the elegant ride of an aircraft carrier or something like that. So there was really, everything was crammed. And there continued to be difficulties with the steering. So about 10 o'clock on January 23rd, 1968, out of the blue, because there's the track that Pueblo had taken for the past couple days, and you see it had 3 operation areas, and the important thing is down there in the lower left. That's the port of Wonsan. And Wonsan was a very heavily fortified port area with anti-aircraft guns, with MiGs, and so forth. So remember, the Blue House assassination attempt had happened a couple of days before. The Koreans were saying, don't mess with our sovereignty. And we have a spy ship hovering off the coast of one of its most fortified ports. And nobody was watching it. It was there on its own. So at 10 o'clock, a sub-chaser comes out of the blue, and a sub-chaser can go about 40 knots top speed. The top speed of Pueblo was about 14 knots. So, you're not going to run away from this ship. And it started to, first of all, just surveil, just look at Pueblo, but slowly but surely it got closer and closer. And shortly after that was joined by 4 other ships. So Pueblo was entirely surrounded, all right? I think this diagram is just amazing. We know already that the guns are secured, and if you walk out onto the deck to try to make them ready to fire, you're going to be fired upon because shortly after a flag signal to heave to and follow me into port, they did fire at Pueblo, and one of the 83 sailors was critically wounded, and he would die. But he was the only one of the crew that perished. So Booker would save his crew of 82 out of 83. But so in this situation, tell me, admirals on the Court of Inquiry who were second-guessing this, how are you going to jump to general quarters and make an effective defense of your ship? It just wasn't to be. So Bucher tried to stall, and it took, he was able to do this for a couple hours, but finally it became clear that he was going to be captured. Now, he was in international waters, and that means he was beyond the 12-mile limit of any North Korean land. And the Navy worships the idea that if you're in international waters, you're safe, right? And they were counting on this. And they can prove through the various chartings and so forth that Pueblo sent, that Pueblo was in international waters beyond the 12-mile limit. So this was a legal harassment, but nonetheless it took place, and it was what the North Koreans had in mind. Okay, so if you can look at this, I don't have a pointer, but you can see North Korean, and you see under the word North go down, Wonsan. That's where Pueblo is, all right? And it's finally brought into the port of Wonsan about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? At 2:15, 2:45, USS Enterprise, you see her down in the lower left, she's coming out of Sasebo on her way to Yankee Station off of Vietnam, and is told to stand fast, that something happened to a ship that we don't even know is in the fleet, something called the Pueblo, has been captured by the North Koreans, so stand fast. So now begins the rush to support, okay? There's no contingency plan, but all of a sudden you need to help a Navy ship which is in harm's way. So look around, and you can see in South Korea itself, maybe 25 minutes away, we've got 6 Phantom jets. You know how they're configured? For nuclear missiles, okay? You don't change the gear that holds those missiles in place just with a snap of a finger. You're talking 3-4 hours, and so the 6 U.S. aircraft that were nearest Pueblo were useless. We're not going to use a nuclear missile to save her. The South Koreans had 200 fighters themselves, but LBJ, President Johnson, wasn't ready to commit himself to unleash what might become a second war, a second front. And so if you unleash the South Korean planes, you might trigger that. And so there was a great reluctance because we were so tied up in Vietnam that we didn't want to start a second front in South Korea. So if you look around, the guy in charge of aircraft in North Asia looked around and tried to see if anything was available. He tried in Japan, Aokini Marine Corps Air Station, but they didn't have anything available. Finally, he came down. If you look at the bottom of the ship, or the bottom of the map there, you'll see the Okinawa. Okinawa was 1,000 miles away, and it had just 12 fighter bombers available, and they were training other pilots. So they were the only ones that could leave, and what happened, rather than, first they had to come back to their base, be fitted with bombs, and then take off. So they were taking off in pairs and flying that 1,000 miles from Okinawa toward Wonsan. But again now, remember it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. People, that Pueblo was in Wonsan. It wasn't until maybe 3 o'clock that people really knew that this had happened. And now it's January, it's dark. It's going to be dark by 5 o'clock. And so even if these planes had been able to get to Wonsan, heavily defended, they would not have been able to have made a difference. So you had an incredible situation here where a major power at war in Vietnam was unable to rally any kind of an air unit that could get to help the Pueblo in time. And of course, what happened? We knew it certainly got to the newspapers the next day, the 24th, and so they say that Enterprise was going to just stand in place, actually. And here are pictures now of our sailors off the Pueblo. That's Lloyd Booker leading his troops into captivity. Now, this was not going to be a happy captivity because the North Koreans didn't regard the Pueblo crew as prisoners of war, subject to the Geneva Convention. They were political prisoners. They were spies. So they were not entitled, even if the North Koreans had wanted to, in their mind, to good treatment. So immediately, our brave sailors were subjugated to constant physical torture, beatings. They were, you can imagine, given almost no reasonable food. Their lodging was very primitive, and it was cold in that time. But it soon dawned on Booker that they were not going to kill him. They were there to get him to sign a confession. All the interrogations that he had, nobody came in and sat down and said, hey, I want you to understand or tell me about this piece of technological equipment that you're using to spy on us. There was none of that. The North Koreans just wanted a confession. And of course, according to our code of conduct, we were supposed to give name, rank, and serial number, period. Well, but since Pueblo was captured so quickly, all the personnel files were intact. So the North Koreans knew everything about each one of the sailors aboard. And therefore, rather than endure further punishment, they began to divulge facts that were right in front of the North Koreans anyway. And so what happened is that there were Puker and certain of his sailors were put to press conferences and made to say things that were, in the eyes of the North Koreans, confessions. But, the wording, the Bucher and other members of the crew said didn't sound right in English. So they were trying to make it sound, letting the world know that yes, we're being tortured, but no, we're not divulging secrets here. Okay. Now, so we have a situation now where our crew is now prisoners. They're being tortured. They're asked to sign confessions and so forth. And LBJ is being advised both ways. We can't afford to open a second front with the North Koreans, or we should go diplomatically and seek a return of our ship and our sailors. And so it's not that we did nothing. After all those aircraft that we tried to rally to support Pueblo right in the beginning, that led nowhere. None of those planes ever reached Wonsan to help the Pueblo. But there was a group, a new flotilla that was brought together called Formation Star. And Formation Star was about 5 aircraft carriers, all the support ships, submarines. We had a real strike force that was rallied over the next several days up. And on Coral Sea, we knew we were going north because all of a sudden we were getting winter gear, heavy jackets, and so forth. And so we left Yankee Station and went north, and all these ships came together, and we sat, and we were dispersed. Because again, there was this fear that if we unleashed an attack on the Pueblo, on the north, first of all, where were our sailors? We didn't know that they had very shortly after capture being taken off base to a nearby military facility. So they would have been lost, and maybe they would have all been executed had we invaded the north or sent planes in. There were also some schemes that, well, we should send in a destroyer who would board the Pueblo, wrench it off where it was moored, drag it out to sea, and save it. Well, what about those North Korean fighters that were there and all the anti-aircraft bombardments and so forth? So anyway, it was an impossible situation. Again, we had all these weapons, but we were unprepared. And when we finally gathered our forces about us, it was too late. So we went the diplomatic way. And here, initially a Navy admiral led the negotiations, but he was in time relieved by this General Gilbert Woodward. And Woodward was a very patient fellow, and it occurred to him that maybe the way to do this is to go as far as we can to confess to our activities, our spy activities, but at the same time disclaim that this confession was only done to free the crew of the Pueblo. And that's what happened. So he signs the documents. This is kind of amazing. He signs the confession on behalf of the America, and then is allowed to disclaim it immediately. But when he signed the document, the Pueblo crew was let free and was able to cross into South Korea, and of course met by an admiral and by other support personnel. So here is the signing and the disclaimer of that. So our men returned home, and they were seen as heroes because they had endured 11 months of torture and uncertainty day to day about what would happen to them, and they were home. Here's Booker with his wife Rose and his 2 sons. Here's a picture of the Pueblo crew of 82 with one who had perished because of initial wounds that were not cared for. So what happens is when a commanding officer of a Navy ship loses his command, they invoke a court of inquiry to see whether the offense of losing the command is court-martialable. And so in January, late January, the court of inquiry begins. And so you have a bunch of who is to blame? The Navy is good on finding people to blame at the last moment. But who is to blame? Is it Booker for being a coward and not at least firing one shot against the North Koreans as they surrounded him? Or was he so poorly supported that he had no chance anyway? Here are the admirals at the court of inquiry. And you can see on their sleeves all the stripes that show their rank. And so here is Booker with his defense attorneys. And there's a picture of those 50 caliber guns that were not going to be very successful anyway. So finally, the court, I'm going to read all this because I think this is amazing. Here's what the court of inquiry said. Commander Booker is to be tried by general court-martial and charged with permitting his ship to be searched while he had power to resist, failing to take immediate and aggressive protective measures when his ship was attacked by North Korean forces, complying with the orders of the North Korean forces to follow them into port. Remember that diagram? He was absolutely surrounded. Generally failing to completely destroy all classified material aboard Pueblo and permitting such material to go into the hands of the Koreans, and negligently failing to ensure before the departure to sea that his officers and crew were properly organized, stationed, and trained for emergency destruction of classified material. Booker was astounded. He thought that he had done the best that he could in an incredible circumstance where he was surrounded by North Korean ships, and the Navy threw it back in his face and said, "But you didn't do anything." So that really was very discombobulating, to say the least, to Lloyd Booker. And he was all set to defend himself. In fact, he would have welcomed a court-martial, because what would he have said? I asked for this and they didn't give it to me. I asked for that and they didn't give it to me. It would have been a real smudge on Navy willingness to help and refit a ship that was going to be on a very dangerous mission to begin with. So finally, Secretary of the Navy John Chafee said, "Enough. These sailors have endured enough. The Court of Inquiry's findings are null and void, and we're going to forget the whole matter." And that's what they did. And frankly, from my point of view, that's what should have been done. Because the guys, the admirals on the court, to become an admiral, you've done something in your career. It's like becoming a general. So they were all hard charging that I would have never left that happen had I had command of the Pueblo. Well, who's to say? Who's to say? However, the Pueblo still is in North Korean waters. In their capital, Pyongyang, it is a tourist attraction to this day. And it's still in commission in the United States Navy lists. So you have Constitution and then Pueblo. Very interesting. I don't know why they don't decommission her, but what is done is done. So what have we learned from this? It's really hard to say, because you see how we have jumped to action for the Israelis. We sent an aircraft carrier to the Med. It's probably off the coast of Israel right now. A whole flotilla is with her. We moved immediately, even though there wasn't a way to have a contingency plan, because the attacks by Hamas on Israel happened so quickly. And one second here, I want to get back to the chronology. So we've learned that you have to support. Susan, could you help me get back? Anyway, what I wanted to focus on now is, to my mind, the Pueblo was just a comedy of errors. It was an accident waiting to happen. Okay, I can take it from there. That's good. It was an accident waiting to happen. And everything that Lloyd Booker knew about that could happen, he had been assured. Remember that other ship, the Banner? The Banner had gone in similar waters and had been harassed by the Chinese and the Japanese, but never boarded. So he even had a testimony from a guy who had been there, and nothing happened. So Booker was able to stay in the Navy for another 3 or 4 years. He finally retired in 1973. You can imagine anybody who felt that they were a hardliner of any sort, would have kind of disdained him. You know, giving up your ship without firing a shot? How could you do that? And there was that feeling behind him. And he would have never been given another command, that's for sure. So he retired in '73. He passed on in 2004 at the age of 77. And I think led a very honorable career under impossible circumstances. Now, it was interesting, in 1988, if you look over on the right there in the middle, the Naval Institute Proceedings has an auxiliary group called Naval History Magazine, and it published an article initially by a bunch of these admirals, who, again, how could he give up his ship? And then Bucher responded to them in very measured terms and so forth. But it was, over a decade later, almost 2 decades, that the issue was brought up. And Bucher was able, in 1990, to get his crew awarded the Prisoner of War Award. The Navy was reluctant until pressured to give them that award because they really weren't in a battle. They really hadn't fought. Just amazing. I dearly love the Navy. I've been affiliated with it since 1965, but this is just one of the unfortunate things that a big bureaucracy has happened to it, and maybe it had to. So that's pretty much it. The Pueblo will probably always haunt us. It is exceptional where a commanding officer gave up his ship without firing a shot. But as you have seen, if you look into it, how could he have done so? And what would it have accomplished? He might have had more casualties among his crew at that point. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, Bob will take that out of the room. We have our first question. Go.
Hello? Okay. Just a general question. I know all the sailors in North Korea, and they were treated roughly. But my understanding, they were always wishing them, the captors, good luck. With the Hawaiian good luck sign, you never commented on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. You should have raised your hand. The finger, okay? I don't even have that slide. I will put that in the presentation. But there's a picture of 5 of the crew members, in their prison garb, and they surreptitiously have the finger shown at various parts, trying to get to those who would see this photo that this was ridiculous and so forth. Now, when the North Koreans found out about that, of course, they got harsher treatment for a while for doing that and shaming the North Koreans with that.
Okay, next.
Question. Of the court-martial and the admirals, any idea or thoughts about whether or not those people could have been facing negative publicity if, how many of the admirals would be sensitive to criticism, so to avoid criticism of themselves, they passed it on to the captain?
Yes. Oh, that's true. Because, let's see, the captain who gave him the assurance that there was a contingency plan was on that panel and denied that he had made that statement. So it was CYA all over. It would have made the Navy look very bad.
Let's get one from that side if you haven't, and then.
This is a question your experience would be able to answer. This happened 7 days before the Tet Offensive, and you said 5 aircraft carriers were off of Korea and Japan. Some were taken away from Vietnam. How much of a fact did the carriers being absent during the Tet Offensive have?
The Tet Offensive was another intelligence failure. We had no idea that, I think it was something like 40,000 North Vietnamese regulars plus the Viet Cong were going to attack a whole bunch of South Vietnam cities, assured as they did this that the population would rise to the occasion, would be happy of the executions that they carried out of sympathizers with the Americans, and that North Vietnam would achieve an incredible victory. It just didn't happen. The South Vietnamese did not rally at all. And, but again, we really didn't know that this was going to take place. Whether the carriers were bombing North Vietnam, I don't think they would have had a big imprint on the South, except maybe to be diverted if they could find formations of Viet Cong or North Vietnamese regulars that they could bomb.
Okay, next over here.
Are there any, did the Navy learn anything about how to deploy these intelligence ships?
Actually,
this can't have gone unobserved.
no, not at all. Actually, they were putting together another one, who would be the successor to Pueblo. But within a year, it just disappeared. So we decided that we would do our spying from our own ships with armament, sometimes with stealth. Our submarines, our nuclear submarines, are very effective in that type of work. So, but no, we never, the Russians have always had trawlers around, and we knew that they were spying on us and so forth. And of course, good guys that we are, they were in international waters. We can't touch you. And they were harassing us. So we were the aggrieved party. So we've never done that well.
Okay, next, sir.
Do you know if there was ever an investigation about the failures of the Navy to actually prepare for such an event? It seems like they investigated the crew and Booker. Did they ever broaden the investigation and find out how they screwed up?
Probably not. And besides, that type of inquiry would be undercover. That would be not for attribution. I'm sure the commands that were involved in the refitting and so forth, would have said, well, if this ever happens again, we'll be sure to give them dynamite, things like that. But it wasn't to be, yeah. And they have a point. When you're a big organization, you have a big war, you want to continue to look good. And it was the captain's fault that the Pueblo was lost. We had nothing to do with it.
Yes.
Sir.
My P3 squadron was stationed in Okinawa at the time the Pueblo was captured. The crew that I was a radio operator in was launched on the radio alert the night of the 23rd, and we were not told we were going. We were given blood chips after they pulled up the ladder on the airplane that had flags of all different countries in the area, and in a foreign language said something like, "I'm an American soldier, and if you return me to my people, you'll be given so much money." And no one told us what we were doing.
Interesting.
We flew out and we were told to follow the Enterprise. And we went out, we dropped sonobuoys around the Enterprise because they were worried about a submarine attack on the Enterprise, not knowing that this was part of a wider war, a wider plan. We followed them until the sun came up and they turned around and started heading north. When we got back to our base, that night we were woken up again, and they took 6 of our 9 airplanes and 9 of our 12 crews and flew us to Iwakuni, Japan, where we began flying Hotel West flights and Hotel East flights on either side of the Korean Peninsula. I'm not sure how many months it was. We were there 2 or 3 weeks, I believe, my particular crew, and then we were sent off to Vietnam because things were getting hot with the Tet. And we had been also, I think some of our planes had been relieved by the sending aircraft down to Adak, Alaska to help us. But we were ready to go, like you said. We were very interested in protecting our Navy personnel.
Sure.
One question I had was, how long were those ships there? I don't know when it ended, because I can't remember. I think I went back there a couple of times.
Formation Star
Yeah, how long? When did that happen?
dissolved in March. Finally.
Something like that.
Yeah, because one of the admirals had said, look, you can bring a new flotilla together, but I can only give you 3 months because then it'll affect our whole bombing schedule in North Vietnam. So we didn't have that much time.
No, we don't have to be able to.
Yeah. You can see how mesmerizing Vietnam must have been, because it stripped everything. And when we needed it for another location, it just wasn't there, because we hadn't thought that it would need to be there.
There was a protest song, a ballad called Mystery Ship, came out a little bit after the Tet Offensive, and it sounds so much like this. So
Oh my gosh.
evidently all this stuff is leaked out, because I knew a little bit about it through this song, but I wasn't sure. It didn't say anything about Pueblo, but it says that 83 men set sail to sea from the San Francisco Bay, and then there was a typhoon in the, I guess they were too busy because the raindrops have fallen or something like that.
Okay, yes.
So it's sort of macabrous and humorous at the same time. It sounded so much like this. So are you aware of the leakage pattern of this? Evidently all this stuff may have been leaked out, and they made a song to it or something like that. But
Could have been, yeah, but I don't know.
If in fact the Pueblo was in international waters when it was captured, has there been any effort to retrieve the ship?
Well,
And that was an illegal
seizure, yes,
seizure.
of course. Navy information and plottings, because Pueblo was constantly in touch, with its superiors, and so they knew where the ship was, and it was in international waters, very clear. But beyond that, initially there was some thought. Let's go back to the White House. LBJ is surrounded by Dean Rusk and McNamara and all of his high cabinet members. And one of the ideas was, let's, as I said, let's let one of our destroyers go in there, board the Pueblo, wrench it from its moorings and will tow it out to sea and scull it or do something with it. But it was, Wonsan evidently was so heavily fortified that it would have been somewhat of a suicide mission. And so what would that have accomplished? We lose a ship and then we lose another one. Yeah.
But no diplomatic efforts have been.
Oh, well, there were simultaneously talks then immediately initiated by our government with the North Koreans to release the prisoners. And we would have asked for the Pueblo, but, you know, they were never going to give it back to us. Yes?
Regarding intelligence ships and the timing here, I am reminded that only, I think, 6 months previous, the Liberty, if you remember the Liberty,
yes,
being strafed during the 6-day war, which it didn't have the same hull number, but it seems to have been another intelligence ship. I wonder, did we take any lessons away from the loss of, it wasn't lost, but the attack on the USS Liberty that happened, as I say, almost 6 months earlier?
I don't know exactly, but I would have to say I don't think so. That was a special situation. We noted that something had happened, and as you saw, the Pueblo was not enabled to be rigged well so that if something poor happened, Liberty was surrounded too. We had other ships nearby, so she was able to escape and go back and be covered.
As it happens, I was at Little Creek during that time, and my ship was across the pier from the Liberty.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you could look at it, and there was an awful lot of bullet holes in the superstructure of the Liberty. It was pretty impressive just to look at it.
Sure.
Gresh, do you want to give the circumstances of the Liberty?
Say again?
You want to give the circumstances of the Liberty incident?
I don't have, I can't speak to that.
Never mind.
It was supposed, yeah. I'll have to incorporate that in the next, but again, it was a similar situation, no question, but I don't think there were any lessons learned.
I have a comment on your splendid presentation. It's the military that generally winds up paying a big price when the big boys make mistakes. And I would just like to reflect, going back to 1945, why did Korea happen to begin with? And having done research for my presentation just peripherally, what I found was in 1945, the United States ambassadors declared what America's interest was in the world as they were dividing up the world after World War II. And one of the things that happened was we declared interest here and there, Middle East and so on, and we did not comment about Korea one way or another, which, as always happens, the enemy was watching. Russia, the North Koreans, apparently North Koreans went to Russia, got permission from Stalin to go ahead with the invasion. So if you want to know, why we wound up then taking a bath as far as our troops are concerned in Korea, it is related to the fact that diplomacy screwed up in 45. And this, in my mind, history just seems to repeat itself, where if diplomacy gets screwed up, we, the military, have to pay this terrible price.
Down the line, yes. Good point. Yeah, Kim Il-sung, when he went into North Korea, was a major in the Russian forces. So, and somehow he was able to convince the commissars that he would be a good leader. And he turned out to be a good leader, but just as crazy, nobody really trusted him. And we have that in his grandson today. Yeah. Yes.
Gresh, this is a general question. We talk, many of these sessions we've talked about intelligence failures associated with the US and probably the Western countries, including this week in Ukraine and others, I'm sure. What are in your mind, what are the intelligence successes that we've had in the since 1945?
Wow. You mean, it's so many of these. I think of Vietnam as, the French were there and had to evacuate under our cover in 1954. And so we saw them being forced out, and we said, we can do it, okay? After we helped the Russians be harried out of Afghanistan, and thanks to our Stinger, our various missiles and so forth, we said, well, why don't we give it a try? Give us 20 years and we'll create a new free, open society. To say, they can't talk about the successes because you'd have to find out who was responsible, and you wouldn't want to let the rest of the world know that we have operatives here, there, and everywhere. But it's clear, the Israelis are right next door to the Gaza Strip and, are touted for having such good intelligence capabilities, and somehow they missed the boat on this one. Our successes, well, we win wars, or we are able to create stalemates.
We didn't get Bin Laden.
We did, okay, Bin Laden, yeah.
Well, we did, eventually. Well, as Rick says, the intelligence successes are not talked about. So there were probably lots of intelligence successes that we do not know about. Anyway, we have time for a couple more questions. Bruce here has one, and the lady in pink is going to be the second one. Okay, take it away, Bruce.
Gresh, thank you for your superb presentation. Was an assessment made of how much intelligence information was actually lost when the Pueblo was seized?
Evidently, it was catastrophic because they had, remember I said they had more material on board than they should have carried and had asked to have it out offloaded before they sailed. Evidently, it was just a treasure trove that would, for a couple decades, be utilized. We don't know exactly, because again, I make that comment, the North Koreans wanted that confession. They were not, but there's one comment by one of the authors that a plane went off to Russia, carrying tons and tons of paper. It must have been that. And surely the Chinese got a portion of that too. So yes, it did great damage. And what do? You just go on.
And all of you that have spoken from the Navy point of view. But at the time, my husband, Bob Martin, or Slater Martin, was stationed in Incheon, and they were under high alert for quite a while because that being a petroleum depot that was being turned over to the South Korean Army. But there was a fear that militants from North Korea would be coming down, so everybody on the whole peninsula was under high alert.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it was, but Pueblo was entirely ignorant that something had happened. An assassination attempt had been made. So there were, just one miscarriage after another. And you just can't plan for those things. They just happen.
Do you know what I love about these Q&A sessions? So many people have personal experiences, and you say, I was stationed there, I was nearby, I was on a ship, my husband was stationed there, and you share your personal story with us, and it just makes the program come alive. It makes it twice as interesting. Wasn't this Q&A session great?
It was great,
It
one
was.
of the best.
Everybody, join me in giving Gresh a big hand. Wonderful program. Wonderful. And I know there would have been more questions, except we had to cut it off sometime, so we did. Thank you, everybody, for being a wonderful audience. This concludes our presentation today. We hope we see you on November 13th. Thanks so much for being a great audience. Good afternoon, everybody.